is attracted to someone who identifies as a man. B is bisexual. That means that you see the binary, man, woman, and either one could be someone you're attracted to. LGBT, T is transgender. I think we're so familiar with that in Nebraska now, aren't we? A little bit of misinformation floating around. When people ask me what it's like to be transgender, I tell them it's like we were all born in a gorilla suit, but yours doesn't fit. It's itchy, you're uncomfortable, you look at everyone else around you and they're happy. They love their gorilla suit. It's the best suit ever. But for you, it is, every time you look in the mirror, it makes you queasy, sick to your stomach. You feel out of place, always out of place, but you also don't see anyone else who's not wearing the gorilla suit. So imagine the courage to take it off. Q. Q is queer. If you are an LGBTQ person who's over about 50, queer was an epithet back in the day. You were called queer and it was not a nice thing. As part of reclamation, younger folks have reclaimed the idea and the name of queer as their identity. But as you welcome maybe older gay folks here, gay is okay. Just say gay. LGBTQI, intersex. So intersex is a gender, and it simply means that when you were born physically, you may have hormones that don't match your outward-facing genitalia. You may have genitalia of both or neither gender. In our society, still 95% of doctors just make a choice, a random choice, as to what would be the easiest, and they pick that gender, and then they chop off everything else. So that's neat, and it's also really unhealthy. Intersex folks, some of them don't want to be fixed. They're okay with who they are, and they're okay expressing themselves as intersex, and that's who they are. So that is a gender, not an orientation. I just want to be very, very clear about that because, gosh, in the news, do we not see that people conflating gender and orientation? They are not the same. So they are also not the same as sexual activity. A is asexual. It just means that you're not really romantically attracted. It can mean that you are only attracted to maybe one person. It takes a long time to get to know them, which we used to call courtship. And now we don't do that as much because internet, super fast. Oh, we're in love, boom, we moved in. Some people are just like, there's maybe one person for me, and it may take me a long time. LGBTQIA 2S+. So 2S means two-spirit. Not every Native American community uses the term two-spirit. Many do, but I believe in Navajo communities, two-spirit is something else. And it simply means that a male spirit and a female spirit exist together within you. And you express as either one. I have a good friend who identifies as two-spirit. They are also transgender. Those are slightly different things. So if you have a Native American or indigenous folks who come into your congregation, let them identify themselves to you. They'll tell you when. I mean, don't we all tell people what we want to be called, right? And then if somebody misnames it, don't we all be like, nope, that's not me. I know as a fat person, I often am labeled as lazy or let's see, what else have we heard, my babe? This is my husband. He's like, please don't call on me. I don't want to talk. It's a blessing to me that he is up this early. He's a tech guy, and he's usually up very late at night. We've heard a lot of things like, he is younger than me and obviously a good-looking dude, and people are like, wow, how'd you snag him? People are really rude, aren't they? People think that they are entitled to your personal information, and that is never the case. I remember I grew up in the 70s. Somebody would have slapped somebody or gasped or said, bless your heart, if you had asked some of the questions people get asked regularly today. It's gross in a little way, isn't it? I mean, maybe I'm old-fashioned, but I don't need to know. So that's where we started with all those identities. Does anyone have questions about something they've heard or people they know who identify and you maybe need to know how to address them? Anything like that? Okay. Room full of geniuses. I love it. Let's talk about using the pronouns they. I know for me, using they is really confusing because it's not natural. Our language is very gendered because it comes from Romance languages and Germanic languages, which have gender implied in each noun. So when you say they, I often, if I know I'm going to be around folks who identify as they, practice saying their name and they. Like, I'm talking to John and they did this. I still mess up. And what do we do when we mess up? Like, you misgender somebody and they correct you and say, oh, actually I use they, them pronouns. I would suggest just saying, oh, thank you so much for letting me know, and move on. Because you know when somebody says something to you that is not quite right, like leaning into it and like apologizing 400 times makes it way worse, right? Like, can we just move on, please? So, gosh, what other things do I hear most often? What? Yes, babe?
I've got one for you. Why should you not ask the question, which one is the husband and which one is the wife?
I mean, would you want to be asked that? How many married couples are in this room? All right, sir, are you the husband or the wife? That's not a question about roles. That's a question about gender stereotypes. Do you do girl things or do you do boy things? How old are we? Come on now. You know, all you need to know is you're the spouse and you're the spouse, you're in love, I'm good, let's move on. I will tell you that in our relationship, I can fix a car and Tony can sew a straight line. So what does gender really mean? Meh. When we talk about gender, aren't we really talking about stereotypes? Every man has to be stoic, strong, able to defend his family, and every woman has to be soft and nurturing and able to cook and sew. Nobody really lives like that, and nobody really ever did live like that. Even if you lived in the 50s, you know that that's a little bit of a lie. Not every couple was like that. There is no Leave It to Beaver in real life. So asking questions like, who's the husband, who's the wife, especially this gets asked to cisgender gay men on the regular. My best friend is a gay man, and he and his husband are in their 60s, and they still get asked this question. I mean, respect your elders. Let's start with that. But it's just kind of gross, right? So I'm going to go through some very typical questions that I normally get. And this truly is a space where you can just ask me anything. I'm okay with it. I have been asked some things. Let me tell you.
There's something I just like to maybe you to do. We are, we're a church. We want to be kind to people and welcoming. So questions like, do you have kids? Those sorts of things, seen as polite, even though they're maybe not always the best questions. So as you're going through these questions, if you could give us what are inclusive, welcoming, better ways to frame conversations,
Yeah.
that might be really helpful for us as we think about what it means to be ONA.
Yeah. And I'm going to be really real here. I'm looking at a congregation of people in which 40 people came to service. I know it feels like you lose people when you declare yourself as something. Look at it instead as a growth opportunity. What you are saying is you're including people. And when you reach out to those communities and they know you're safe, that's how you grow a congregation. That's how you grow a congregation, not leaning into tradition. So I think it's very brave. So one question I get a lot is, how do I make myself more approachable to people who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, etc.? The first thing is that you demonstrate that you're comfortable. When you see somebody who shows up at the door and you're pretty sure they're transgender, Just walk up to them like anyone else. Greet them the exact same way you did the person that you did before. Because they are indeed human beings. They are indeed people. I had a great welcome when I walked in. Nobody knew me from Adam except Abby, so it's okay. Be sensitive to assumptions you might make. If you have a regular looking dude like, say, Tony or Matt walk in, don't assume they're married to a woman. Don't assume they're married at all. I mean, come on, this is 2023, and for better or for worse, people aren't getting married like they used to. And they do it when they're in their 30s usually. So just say, hey, I'm really glad to see you here today. And don't even ask a question about, is anyone else coming with you? Do you have kids? People will tell you, you know. What my new like thing is, tell me about like what makes you happy. Tell me about how you feel about, you know, your life. And I know those seem like really hooey wooey questions, but are you asking questions because you want to know everything about somebody, or are you asking a question because you want them to know you think they're important? So I would suggest questions like that. Try to use inclusive language. That's tough, because if you ask some people, like, tell me what pronouns you're comfortable with, that makes them uncomfortable, right? It makes them uncomfortable to ask that. So if someone walks in and you say, oh gosh, what's your name? And they give you a name that feels very gender fluid, like I have a friend named Kyan, and nobody would know what that, I mean, that's not a gendered name. If you don't need to know someone's pronouns, do you need to know someone's pronouns when they walk in the door? Probably not. Sometimes it's like, okay, this is a very old saying, so for the younger folks in the room, like here's an educational part. Discretion is the better part of valor. Is something I have lived my life with. Sometimes it's okay just not to ask the question. Ask the questions you really want to know. How can I make you more comfortable in the church? Do you need anything? Thank you so much for being here today. You're really welcome with us. This is tough. Confront other people who say things that are homophobic or a terrible joke. I am 100% sure that probably won't happen here, right? I think that for the most part, we're very polite people in a church, but it's outside the church that we're not polite people. And people watch. You're seen when you allow something like that to happen in your presence. And it makes you feel icky inside that you didn't do anything later. I know I have regrets in my life about times I should have stood up and I just didn't. Like even from high school when people were bullied and I didn't want to make myself a target, so I just moved on. But we're old people now, right? There's no risk to us, not anymore. We have careers, we have lives, we have partners, we have a church community. Standing up and saying, gosh, that feels really harmful and inappropriate. I know you don't mean to hurt somebody, but it really could hurt somebody to say these things. And then finally, learn a little bit. How many times have we looked in the newspaper and said, gosh, that doesn't sound right? This is a great opportunity. We have the internet at our fingertips. No more do we have to go to the library to find out things. We can look anything up. Know your sources, obviously. There are certain news channels I would not say are probably going to be factual sources of information, but you have the opportunity. Even Wikipedia is a great place to start. And when in doubt, if it's a question about the LGBTQ community, have me on speed dial. You can just text me and I'll be like, here's what it is. We're good. When you know things, you can do things. You understand what folks are going through when you understand their environment, let's say, their environment. Does anyone have any questions yet? I know we are deep in chip coma from lunch. So, what kinds of things might a trans person go through when they begin to acknowledge their true identity? The first thing I want to acknowledge is sort of the elephant in the room. How many of us, and I would love hands, have heard God doesn't make mistakes? God doesn't make mistakes. I mean, I've heard that. Being transgender is a mistake. It's just biology. Concentrate on the beautiful thing that God has made inside a human being. The heart, the mind, the soul, the power, the love. How much does genitalia really matter? Not much. Not much. People who are transgender often, I'm going to say always, feel feelings of guilt, isolation, depression, suicidal feelings, and low self-esteem. There's startling statistics around transgender suicide. If you are a person of color and transgender, your lifespan average is 42 years. It doesn't really matter what your health is. If you are a young person, and I have a feeling you're going to get some younger folks in here who are transgender, if you are a white and transgender, you are 3 times more likely than your peers to have suicidal ideation and 3 times more likely to commit suicide successfully. When you add intersections of things like faith, some faiths, let's say, culture, race especially, exponential increases in the amount of suicide. And do we not need more young people in this world? Our population is aging. We need young people because I know I would like somebody to take care of me when I become older. So how do we stop that? As I said in my very short, admittedly, sermon, we talk to people and we say, I'm good with who you are. In the same way that as I get older, I really appreciate being included in young spaces and having people say, I appreciate who you are even though you are unlike us. I mean, when you're in a room of 20-year-olds and you get a standing ovation because of something you said, you really feel like you have cracked the code. Am I right? Like, woo, I'm pretty cool, That's an amazing feeling. So when you are in a room with a bunch of people who are unlike you, and you are welcoming to this kiddo who's maybe not accepted at home, certainly bullied at school, and you are kind to them, maybe you're the person that saved their life. And there is nothing more important than that I can think of on this earth. It costs $40,000 to $50,000 to get top surgery in which maybe mammary tissue is removed or added, or the illusion of mammary tissue is added, I would say, and bottom surgery. Who has that laying around? And because transgender folks are also generally economically marginalized, they have even more trouble basically aligning their physical self and their true self. So that is another struggle these folks go through. I have friends who are transgender and you would never know it. They walk through life and they do what's called passing. They just pass. Nobody knows. And then I have friends who are transgender and they get misgendered all the time. That leads to discrimination, 100%. With transgender folks, coming out is not the ultimate goal. It's not coming out. It's being recognized as the gender they are. This is not I am changing, this is I am truing myself. I am distilling myself to what's real. Once they transition, they might not want to be called transgender anymore. They might just want to be the gender that they are. Let the person tell you that. Some people just don't identify as transgender after they transition, and that's okay. They might just want to be a man or a woman. It is really important never to out somebody. Does everybody know what outing somebody means? Like, look at my transgender friend. Isn't they amazing? You don't need to do that. This is my friend John, full stop. Because I certainly wouldn't say, This is my friend Sally. She's real old. Let's not do that. We don't need to do that. That's not an important part of your identity. I know as I age, being older is not part of my identity. Being wiser is. Does anyone have questions about the transgender experience or what it means to be transgender? Yes?
People may not be familiar with cisgender.
Okay. So I've been asked to explain what cisgender is, and that simply means that when the doctor pats you in the butt and looks at your genitals and say you are a boy or a girl, that you agree with that your lived experience agrees with that first diagnosis of which gender you are. I am cisgender for the most part. I was termed a girl when I was born, and I pretty much feel that way now. Tony is cisgender. He was labeled a boy when he was born, and he identifies with that now. That's it. Let's just say cisgender people are the ones that have the free pass through that part of life, right? So it's it just makes things a little bit simpler. So thank you for that question. If I had anything to give you, I'd totally give it to you. Because that was the first question. I will give you a hug later if it's okay. How should I respond when my heterosexual friends or coworkers who feel negatively about a lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender person say something, do something? Here's the biz. Is it our job to change people's minds, every single person we meet? And more importantly, is it our capability to do so? Some people will never want to hear what you have to say, and that's okay. That's okay. It's better to use our energy with people who have questions, right? Because if they're asking you a question, boy, do you have an opportunity to build a bridge. They are questioning, which means that things aren't concrete in their brain. They want to know something. Ooh, do you have an opportunity there to add some understanding to this planet, and don't we need more of that? So what I would simply say is have a discussion like they're a person, even if the thing they ask is egregious and put in a way that's real offensive. I think we've all probably heard LGBTQ people called things that make us really uncomfortable. So it's totally cool to say, like, I'm glad to answer your question, and I'd love to talk to you about it, but can I ask you not to use these words again? Because it makes people hurt. And even though there is a lot of hate in the world, I don't think most people want to hurt others. They may just be unaware of it. And certainly someone who asks you a question is probably somebody who doesn't necessarily want to hurt others. So let's start with the hope that that is true. Help them see they're talking about a human being. These are not lab rats, just the same way elderly people are not lab rats, disabled people are not lab rats, neurodivergent people. These are human beings. They had parents, they grew up, they had pets, they do stuff, have jobs, contribute to our economy, all those things. They're just regular people with an extra identity, right? And that's what we talked about today, naming ourselves, creating identity. So the other thing I would say is make sure you have accurate information. If you're not sure, say, hey, let's find out together. People love it when you are just a little vulnerable with them, because unfortunately we live in a world where conversation actually often has dynamics of power in it. So if you just talk to somebody and say, I'm not totally sure, let's look up stuff. And then you can lead by example, and you can find a source that is a real source of information, right? And be like, oh, here's a great website to learn things about. And if anybody wants like a list of websites I would recommend, I have them in my pocket at all times. Also let them know that there's a limit to what you're going to tolerate. In the same way that racist epithets are intolerable, so should LGBTQ plus epithets be intolerable. Should be the same. We don't use the N-word. We don't use the other words that are bad about LGBTQ people. And it's okay to set that boundary with other people. You don't need to have poison spewing into your ears. It's hard enough to make it through the day somehow, right? I mean, you wake up, your knees hurt, your coffee maker doesn't work, already your day is ruined. So don't allow people to hurt you with their bad words or their terrible thoughts. If you can build understanding, do that. And if you can't build understanding because you're at the grocery store and you want to leave, as we all do, it's okay to say, I'd love to talk to you about that another time. Could we set up a coffee and move on? And finally, remember that even if you don't feel like it, everybody in this room is a leader. You're a leader because you have declared yourselves as people who care. Even if your understanding is maybe not where you want it to be, you have at least said, it matters to me that I care about other people and I want the people around me to do the same. You have a great opportunity to lead by example there. And you don't know if the little kid in the next aisle who's hiding behind the lettuce because he has makeup on his face, what if he hears that and thinks, I'm going to ask Mom if we can go to church? What about them apples? You just don't know how your words affect people. So say what you really feel. Does anybody have questions yet? Yes.
I just have a question about when we come up with laws that say that minors cannot have gender-affirming health care, what does that really mean? Can they not get counseling? Can they not? I don't think people understand the ramifications of a law like that.
Okay. So the question is about, really it's about recent legislation in the state of Nebraska that bans gender-affirming care for minors. What does it mean? In real terms, it means an increased rate of suicide in our state. That's what it means. In legal terms, it means that minors who are not already in care, there is some gray area around kiddos who have already started care. And by care, I mean it almost always starts with counseling. There is misinformation out there about day one, kiddo says, I know I'm a girl. Day 3, they're having surgery. This is not something that happens because it's a very big deal. Even if you're just pragmatic, the liability risk for a doctor to jump into a procedure like that makes it's impossible for that to happen. So let's start with curing misinformation. What really happens is that a kiddo will come in and say, I feel like I'm a girl. By the time it gets to medical staff, it has already been counseling. It has already been usually support groups for parents, because how many parents have ever been equipped for that, right? I buy my kids soldiers and that's what we're gonna do. We don't know what to do. So you've already gone through support, right? So by the time it gets there to medical staff, we've done therapy, we've done all those things. That could be a year or 2. The first step is always hormones, unless there's an underlying physical condition, but let's say an average kiddo. Hormones that will help you affirm, and for some transgender people, that's as far as they ever go. That doesn't mean they're not real transgender people. It simply means this is enough for me. I more or less look like what I want to be, and I'm comfortable how I am. I feel proud and strong how I am. So hormones is sometimes the end game. But let's talk about surgery. The top and bottom, and some insurance carriers cover it and some insurance carriers don't, and that whole process is so confusing. If insurance is going to cover it, the amount of hoops you have to jump through is incredibly high. And that is why you hear senators talking about, it doesn't really matter because it's only a few kids in our state anyway, right? And part of that is because your parents don't even want to do it, so you can't do it until you're after 18 anyway. And part of that is because the amount of trouble you have to go through to even get this started is a lot. there could be a year in which you're just having discussions with your family. So now you're already 50 years old, let's be real. But it's possible. So in our state, what it's going to mean is that unless you've already started care, you could do the counseling part and then you stop. Imagine that having to go to gym and dress in the men's locker room makes you physically ill because that's not where you belong. Imagine that you are nauseous, you are trembling, it just makes you feel gross to be identified as the other gender. And I know it's hard for us to understand, but when gender becomes the number one part of your identity that you are focused on, being forced to do anything that identifies you as the other gender that you are not, is heartbreaking. It is physically disgusting to you. So when we talk about transgender kiddos, I don't even know where I was going with this, but I liked my point. When you talk about these transgender kiddos, it's unbelievably important to their lives to affirm the gender that they really are. Because again, God didn't make a mistake. God just gave that kiddo a little extra courage so that they could go through this. I mean, for those of us who lived in the 70s, how many gay people did we know? Nobody. I had a great aunt who lived with her best friend. In the 70s, it was a huge, big deal to say, I am gay or lesbian. In the 2020s, now we are at the point where we are talking about being non-binary, transgender. It is the same huge, big deal. It's the same courage. It's the same risk. So I will say that in our state, this legislation has already been challenged. We've seen recent events in Arkansas. I feel pretty strongly that there is going to be quite a gap of time before we see this actually in place. So I will also say that in our state, 90% of cases are going to have to go through a single person to vet them. And imagine the amount of power that is for one human being to have. I don't know how you feel about it, but I don't like it. So that's something to keep an eye on. This will be challenged, certainly, and it's going to be in courts. So let's see what happens. Write your senators, all that jazz, we all know. Community activism. Does that help? Okay. And thank you for that question. That's a great question. This is a weird question, but I still get it. I still get it. What should I say to someone who's afraid of getting AIDS from a gay person? It is 2023, and I still get that question. I don't want them in my pool. What if they have AIDS? Okay. You can't get a blood-borne communicable disease from talking to somebody. On the other hand, you can't change someone's mind if they don't understand or believe in science. So you can simply say, look, this is a disease that is not communicable by any of the activities that we do in our church. If you have more concerns, I can give you a pamphlet. I mean, yes, you don't hear it a lot, but I still hear it, so I wanted to bring it up. Does anybody have questions about HIV/AIDS? No. Everybody here is like, we got it. We know how to read. We're in good shape. How can I support LGBTQ people without my own sexual orientation becoming an issue? This is a question really for people under 40. I mean, once you're a grandparent, people tend not to question you about things. I don't know. Who are you? Do you know who you are? Are you strong in your identity? If you have named yourself as one thing and somebody says you're another, does that have any power over you? Really? If you know who you are and somebody says you're actually purple, meh, I'm not, move on. But it makes people uncomfortable, right? Oh, you're friends with gay men, you must be gay. Yes, it's juvenile. It's juvenile. It's what a child would say. But it is a concern because some people don't want to feel risk. They don't like that pushback. The best thing you can do is encourage everyone else that you meet in this church to be comfortable with who they are and to embrace it. And by making them strong, you make everyone else around them strong too. So I'll probably leave it at that. How do I get others to be more open-minded about LGBTQ people? The short answer is you kind of don't. People have to be ready to love. They have to lead with care. Some people, empathy is not a natural skill. We learn how to be empathetic. We're only born with a capacity. So my best answer to that is to be a role model. Talk to everybody the same way. Treat everyone the same with care and respect. That is the best way you get other people to be open-minded. If they ask for your beliefs, share them. Share them in a loving language, you know. I know gay people, and I love them. They're great. They work really hard. My friend is the CEO of blah, blah, blah. My other friends are ladies, and they are great parents, and their kids are happy. You know, it's those personal stories that change people's minds. It's not the big edicts. It's not legislation. It is not headlines. It's saying to you, gosh, you know, do you know any gay people? My gay friends are great. My gay friends are great. I would love to tell you about them. You know, in reason, let's not out people. That's another story. But, you know, it's personal stories, it's direct individual connection that changes people's hearts and minds. It is not saying, you're an idiot if you don't like LGBTQ people, even if that's what you feel in your heart of hearts. Who doesn't like the rainbow? Let's get real. But lead by example, 100%. If LGBTQ topics come up in a weird social situation, like say, Thanksgiving, which happened to us last year, you know, be kind and share and keep it simple. You know, I believe everybody deserves love. I believe everybody deserves an opportunity to be who they are. Because, you know, if you have to be pragmatic, say, this is how we keep people in our state. This is how we drive innovation and growth in our state, is by accepting everyone for who they are and making it possible for everyone to thrive. How many people in this room feel like right now we're just surviving? I know I do sometimes, right? What does it take for us to thrive? The very first thing is belonging. That is the number one thing that helps people thrive anywhere, is knowing they belong there. So drive it with your words, with your deeds. If you don't have the capacity, it's okay to not have the conversation. I will tell you that every gay person I know is expected to be an expert on every other gay person on the planet. Sometimes you do not have the capacity. You don't have the capacity to tell people about every national concern of elderly folks. You don't have the capacity to be the sole representative of Black people in the entire nation. And in the same way, you do not have the capacity to be super Christian all the time. Sometimes you take the cape off and you just put it to the side. And that's okay. That's okay. Do not feel shame about conversations that you're not prepared to have. We all feel a little bit of shame about not having stepped up in situations. If you truly don't have the capacity to have that conversation, because we are human beings and things happen in our lives, don't have it. Don't have it. Say, I'd love to talk to you again another time, but my stress level is a little high right now. This isn't the time. It's okay. Shame just poisons us. It doesn't take us anywhere, right? How do I respond to someone who tells a homophobic joke? I think we've covered that. Number one, don't laugh. Let's start with that. Transphobia is really, really high right now. Why? Does anyone have an idea of why people feel really transphobic right now? Say that again?
I said Fox News.
Yeah, misinformation. No matter the source, although we all know there are some that are very egregious. What else? Why would someone be transphobic?
It makes me feel icky.
Makes you feel icky. Here's the biz. When I meet someone, the last thing I want to think about is anything below their neck. And I certainly don't care about your intimate life. I just don't. It's not my business, and I don't, hetero, homo, anything else, I do not imagine it. So when somebody says it makes me feel icky, I'm kind of thinking, why are you thinking about it? Are you thinking about my sex life? Because don't. Ew. What are other reasons that people might be transphobic? Table A. Nothing.
Fear that it'll convert your kids.
It'll hurt your kids.
Convert.
Oh, convert. Maybe both, right? Convert and hurt.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Woo! How many people have been converted to being transgender?
Because it's so easy. I mean,
Right.
you just
Woo!
want to be that.
Surprise!
I mean, I watched Mulan once.
It's true. It's true. You know, we know in this, I would say, looking at your faces, you are all comprehending that it's not possible to be converted to something like that. I mean, if one conversation could convert us, let's be real, we'd all be Husker fans, we'd all be super conservative Republicans, and we would all be farmers. I mean, that doesn't do it. You don't get converted to being gay. You don't get converted to being transgender. You don't get converted to being a race other than the one you were born in. There is that one lady, but I'm thinking that's a mental issue. But you know, come on. But the problem is people believe it. If my child goes to Drag Queen Story Hour, and let's be real, drag queens and transgender people are not the same. Being a drag queen is a performance. Being transgender is an identity. They are different. But if I take them to something like that, what if then they want to be like that? Okay, I do not have children, but I have raised many of my nieces and nephews on my own, and I will say children might think it's cool for a minute, right? I might dress like a girl. And then they'll get tired of it half a second later and move back into their life that is the life that they need, that play with the toys they like, express themselves the way they want. What I would say to someone who says, transgender folks might convert my children, I would say, actually, I think you're a great parent, and I think your children are probably going to identify the way that they're going to identify, despite who they talk to, because I'm sure you are nurturing your children to be strong, independent people. Yes, that's flattery. I get it. But why would any parent think their child is so weak of mind and soul that they're just going to pick up whatever identity, you know, now they're a frog, now they're a piece of grass. I mean, come on. Simply say to them, there is no evidence, not statistical, no data-driven evidence or empirical evidence, nor is there any anecdotal evidence of a child ever being converted to being a different gender. That evidence does not exist because there is no reality in it. And trust me, there have been studies. Studies have been done on can influence, significantly change your child's character and who they are, the direction of their life. It can't do it in terms of being transgender, and it generally can't do it in terms of sexual orientation either. Yes, experimentation happens, but that's also just how life is. We try things, we don't like them. Tony still hates ketchup. It's how it is. Does that help? It's difficult to talk to somebody when they're saying something to you and you're like, you might as well be talking about Smurfs. I don't even know. Like, what are you talking about? Flatter them. I'm sure you're a great parent. Your kids will know who they are. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. They'll lead by example. As long as you love and nurture them and help them explore ideas, I'm sure they'll be fine. They'll be great. However, whatever gender, whatever they want to be, your parenting is going to help them get there. Yes, that seems sneaky, but yes, ma'am.
On the subject of children and youth in the church, do you have any suggestions on, I mean, I've worked with youth for years, children and youth, and I have been surprised sometimes by somebody later on that has, oh, yeah, and then it's like, oh, that makes sense. There's things that, you know, and I try to go back and be like, did I treat them a certain way? Did I, you know, it's like, no, I told them God loved them and that I love them and all was good. But we still tend to sometimes tease little kids about, is that your girlfriend? Is that your,
Yeah.
is that your, you know, are those things dangerous to
Yes.
do? Is it?
That's just gendered language. We all grew up with that, right? I know I was asked about my boyfriend for since I was 3, and I got to tell you, when I was 3, my goal was to get a pony and nothing else. And that lasted until I was about 25 years old. So, actually, anecdotally, I created a campaign when I was 8 years old where I made posters and presented to my parents the benefits to a child of having a pony. We lived on a farm, so right there it was easy, right? But, you know, here are the benefits of having a pony. I'll be more outdoors. I'll be in great shape. I'll learn how to care for another thing. Yes, I got a pony. Just putting it out there. Gendered language is always dangerous for adults and children, and it's hard to get rid of. I still call people guys all the time. In the Midwest, we don't mean a gender when we say guys. That's not, I'm not saying men, I'm saying y'all. It's Midwest for y'all, is it not? We've got to be a little careful about that. So if we can learn how to say folks, friends, my buddies, whatever is appropriate for the situation, that's great. Teasing people about boyfriends, girlfriends, it's tough. Maybe we could convert that into, do you like anybody right now? Like. And I'm going to say, probably they don't, but that's okay. Or ask them, what's your favorite animal? Because what we're doing is trying to connect with them, right? We're trying to get them to love us and trust us so that we can give them some knowledge and some care and some guidance. That's what we're doing with kids. So what kind of questions would help people connect to you? Let me ask you, do you have a boyfriend? Have we connected right there? I think we didn't. But if I said, tell me what made you really happy today, I've asked her something that she cares about. So ask kiddos something they care about, which is usually food, animals, what shows they watch, if they got to go on a trip, that kind of stuff. Favorite dinosaur? I still ask Tony that, and it changes pretty regularly. Connect in a different way. We say things to kids that are important to us. It's not important to them. That would be my suggestion. Okay, so this one is directly relevant to y'all. See what I did there? How can I respond to people who object to LGBTQ people for religious reasons? Raise your hand if you're a biblical scholar. Raise your hand if you've read the Talmud. Raise your hand if you've read the Quran.
In translation, so it's only somewhat true.
Exactly. I have also read the Trinity of Holy Books. And I can tell you that from a historical perspective, none of them even really mention homosexuality. None of them. There's a lot of cross-dressing. There's some gender swapping. There's some super gross things that we won't talk about. Because these are books that are relating historical things through the eyes of one person. This is a great example of keep the message, but leave the words, right? I mean, if you've read anything about Lot, you would run screaming from the room. When people object to being gay for religious reasons, ask them what their religion is about. I would strongly suggest saying, what parts of being Christian are really important to you? Okay, and if they say excluding people, hating people, if they say making sure that our Christianity remains pure, those kinds of things, you're not talking to a Christian, are you? That's not what Christianity is about. I don't follow a faith religion, but I know that's not what Christianity is about. When I talk to a real Christian, they lead with love. They lead with acceptance. How many stories in the Bible are about Jesus capitulating to powerful people because he wants them to like him? 0. If they bring up some of the chapters and verse that we hear very hackneyed, right? Letters to Paul, for instance, there's some things in there that could be interpreted as homosexuality. By the way, the soldier lying with another soldier has to do with billeting people in a tent. That's a totally different thing, not about homosexuality. But, sorry, I have 4 degrees in history. There comes a point where you can't do anything about it. Because if what they say about their faith feels very facile to you, they're saying, I really believe in this one part of the Bible, or I really think this. And you're thinking to yourself, what about the other 8 bazillion pages in that book? They're not ready to have a conversation with you. They're not ready to question who they are and how they express their faith. So maybe the right answer to that is, when I think about my Christianity, I think about love and acceptance and making sure people are safe and that they have a refuge and that they have enough food and that they feel joy. And I hope that that's how you feel too. If they say something that's homophobic about the Bible, and then they also say, well, Jesus was full of love. Okay, so there's cognitive dissonance there, right? I'm saying hate, but I also believe in love. What you can also say is, well, let's talk about that. If you have capacity, you may not have the capacity to have this conversation with people because it's exhausting, right? It's exhausting to do that. Sometimes you're like, I have 58 cups of coffee in my body and I've got nowhere to go. Let's do this. And sometimes you're like, all I want to do is be in a hammock right now. I don't have it. I can't. And that's okay too. That's okay too. Does that help? Okay, awesome. There are also religions that fully embrace LGBTQ people as part of the identity of the religion. Maybe they should convert to that religion. I don't know. Religion's tough, right? Because if it's a strong part of your identity, it may also be a strong part of your values and your moral code. And changing values is almost impossible. And understanding that some people's stated values are very different than how they act. I mean, is that not the process of aging and becoming wiser? Is so that the way we act towards other people actually reflects how we feel? Is that not what we do as we age? And at some point our give a shit breaks and we're just like, I don't even care. I'm just gonna do what I do. That is who we are, and some people just aren't at the stage you're at, right? This is going to be a kind of a laundry list, so gird your loins. What kind of challenges do members of the LGBTQ community face? Violence is number one. An LGBTQ person who is identifiable by looks or just assumed to be LGBTQ is 9 times more likely to be the victim of violence from a stranger. In Omaha, even if it has not been publicized, there have been about 12 gay bashing incidents this year. And did we see it in the news? That's something to think about as well, what we pay attention to, right? In some countries, you will be killed if you are holding hands with someone of your same sex. That seems extreme, and it seems unimaginable, but what's the first expression of love that we learn? Hold hands. What keeps us safe with our parents when we first start walking across the street? Holding hands. Something to think about. Despite the lack of legal punishments for being LGBTQ in countries like ours, still the target of homophobic and transphobic violence, including verbal harassment, discrimination of employment, and lack of access to health care. If you are LGBTQ, you have a 33% higher chance of living below the poverty line. If you are LGBT, I have these like in my head. If you are LGBTQ and you are over 60, you are very likely not out to your doctors. Imagine, I know you think, well, it shouldn't really matter, it's just a person, right? But it does matter because doctors also need to know your social history to understand what your risk might be in the future. So it's gross, I'm sorry. When you are older and LGBTQ and you move into care, a care setting, a senior care setting, 75% of people go back into the closet. They do not have pictures of their loved ones out. They do not have friends over. If they seem too gay, no pride flags, no saying, I was in love with Bill and we had a beautiful life together and he just passed away. That person is erased from your life. When you are older, that should be the time of your life where you can say and do anything to bring yourself joy because you have earned it. Imagine going back into the closet and erasing love. Sorry, it makes me tear up. Schools, work environments, and public spaces do not have policies in place to protect queer people or guarantee equal treatment. We do not have federal protection for LGBTQ people. It is not part of the Civil Rights Act. There is an addendum to it called the Equality Act. I don't know if you guys watched the news this week. See, I said guys. But that has been reintroduced in the Senate. It passed the House. It's been reintroduced in our Senate. That does specifically name a couple groups that are excluded, which are LGBTQ folks and people with disabilities. The ADA does not directly prohibit discrimination in every place for people with disabilities. The Equality Act will feel like a blanket. Like how every flavor starts with vanilla, the Equality Act is the beginning and the thing that covers everything. So there's something to keep an eye on in the Senate as we watch what they do, or let's be real, don't do. Because that could be very important in the future. About, I would say, let me stop there. About 22 states have LGBTQ. I keep forgetting we don't have 100 states. I don't know why. About 22 states have LGBTQ specific non-discrimination acts, especially in the workplace. You can't stop people from discriminating in the grocery store, but in the workplace where you're there to make money to take care of your family, I think we can agree that discrimination should just not be happening. It's hard enough to go to work and leave your home, especially if you're an introvert. It's hard enough to go to work at all for most of us. Let's be real. We'd rather be at home or do something else. Let's make it as easy as possible. Just go and do your thing. Because don't we need more people leaning into the things that make them special and a genius and contribute to society and building new products and getting us to a new planet in space after we destroy this one and all the other things that genius people do. We need that, right? So let's create a workplace that allows it and schools that allow it. Mental health wise, I do a different presentation of mental health, and I just presented at UNMC. The chances of having any kind of mental health challenge is a lot higher for LGBTQ people. And it's not because being LGBTQ is a mental challenge. It is because you still have to exist in the world. When you are different and exist in a world where people let you know you're different every day, it exacerbates tendencies. We all have the ability to be depressed, but it's exacerbated when our environment wants us to be depressed, sort of, so to speak, right? There's also a problem that LGBTQ people have less access to healthcare, period. So the diagnosis rate is lower, just like it is for African American folks and many other marginalized communities. So it's definitely, it's hard to be gay in this world. Think about the courage it takes every day to just be who you are. I know for me, saying I am disabled made me physically ill and made me start crying the first time I said it out loud. Because I want to be strong and I want people to see me that way. If you are a lesbian, if you are gay, if you are transgender, if you are non-binary, you will have the same feeling. You want people to see and accept you for who you are. You can be strong in your identity, but the world doesn't always want that. So a little extra grace is always welcome. We just talked about, does it have a negative impact on children? No. I mean, don't we want our kids to meet a lot of different people so they know? Like, why would we want our kids to be less informed, know less people, love less people? This is a diverse world. This state will be 50% Latin, Latino, Hispanic by 2046. That's a startling statistic, isn't it? The question is, does it make you feel afraid? Or does it make you feel like there's an opportunity? Maybe the opportunity to learn Spanish. Just putting it out there. Diversity should not make us feel afraid. Diversity should make us feel grateful that we live in a world where people can move across the country borders and be part of our communities. But gay people are already here. They were here when indigenous people, there are 27 tribes of indigenous people that were in the state, and there were gay people and transgender people there. The first settlers, there are historical accounts of first settlers where it was two buddies who lived together until they died, and I'm sure they were just friends. But this is something where we're just seeing the people that already exist, and shouldn't we love them? Shouldn't we love them? That's the end of my spiel. Does anybody have any questions? Yes, Matt.
So we talked when we were helping the refugee family that came in. One of the things that we talked about was the difficulty of navigating a new. We talked about navigating a new world. We talked about navigating a grocery store. Right?
Yeah.
Like, can you imagine coming from, somewhere not here to navigating a grocery store here, and what that might be like and how hard that might be. And so my question that's related to that is, for LGBTQ folks, what are some of the things that they have to do that we, if we are not LGBTQ or part of the minority group, what are some of the struggles that they might have in doing normal things? You touched on it with finding a doctor. I mean, I know some of these things because, for those of you who may not know, online, this is on Reddit, people will ask, hey, where's a trans-friendly doctor? There aren't many in town. There's a really good one.
Who only has 24 hours in their day.
Yes, exactly, yes. So, but my question is because as a church, if we want to be a place that is welcoming, what are the things that LGBTQ folks experience and have to look for and have to go through just to go and be in safe places and part of safe communities and that sort of thing?
So the question is about, if I'm reading you correctly, the question is about, in our church, how can we make things feel good to people? What are some challenges that LGBTQ folks can go through that we can then address in how we conduct ourselves in this church?
And sort of just help us know what that experience is like, because it's really hard. I can walk into any space.
That's right.
I don't ever have to worry about my safety. I'm a large, white, grouchy, middle-aged dude, right? Like there's never a space. There's never a space that I have to walk into that is challenging for me. But I know that's not the case, and so I never have to go online and look and say, "Where's a safe?"
Right.
Where's a safe grocery store that I can go to? Where's a safe doctor that I can go to? Where's a safe church that I can go to? So what I'm asking, kind of what that experience is like, so that we can hear that to know if we don't personally have that experience.
Okay, so what's the experience like to live openly as an LGBTQ person? I may not be the best person to answer this because my particular flavor of LGBTQ is unknown. I'm technically heterosexual, which means that for me everything is flowy. I don't worry about my gender, I don't worry about my sexual orientation. I live in the moment, but nobody knows about it, right? So, and please, anyone correct me if you know better than I, but to live as other, right? To be significantly different than the majority of people around you means that normal things can be a risk. You get up in the morning, you go to Starbucks with your partner, your husband, your wife, your spouse. They misidentify your name. Maybe your name is Aaron as a girl, but you look like a boy, so they spell it Aaron as a boy. So within 15 seconds of waking up in the morning, you've been misgendered. So let's start there. Pure expression. Walking up to a stranger, being questioned, going to a job interview, all of those things. You have to make yourself smaller. You have to contract in and measure every word you're saying just to be careful that you aren't discriminated against. You have to treat the world prophylactically. What you're trying to do all the time is prevent people from knowing who you are because you're pretty sure you're going to be discriminated against. And then you get less. You have less opportunity, less safety. If you're LGBTQ, you are approximately, I think, 26% less likely to be promoted at your workplace. Seems like a small statistic, but it's not when it's you, right? You go to the grocery store with your partner, you have to be really careful not to call her sweetie, honey, lovey, kissy fur, whatever your pet names are. If you have children and they go to school, they're at risk of bullying because their parents are two women or two men or two people who are transgender. So already you feel guilt about your identity because you have made your children unsafe. Even if it's not you making your children unsafe, it's the rest of the world making your children unsafe, right? You talk to your boss, you're not out at work. Your boss says, "What did you do this weekend?" You stop and you think, how do I both be honest and not really tell them anything? You go to adopt a dog. They ask you, how many people live in your household? 6. How many adults live in your household? 2. What's your husband's name? You go to do any legal document of any kind ever, and instantly you're misgendered, you're misrepresented. If you are non-binary, changing the pronouns in a legal document is excruciating. Apparently nobody can do control-find when it's a gender. Just saying.
Just so everyone knows, the paperwork says I'm the wife and she's the husband.
Yeah, and that's not true. You are wives.
You get
Yep.
It's spouse one and spouse two.
The second
And when you
form.
go to get the marriage license,
Yep.
it's husband
And wife. Yep.
So if you wrote your name on spouse one, you're a husband. I was husband. Did you guys know that?
Struggle is real.
I have to carry a purse. Do you know how much that hurts?
Yeah. Yeah. I will say now you're obligated to earn more money and take care of the car. Just putting it out there. When Tony and I got married, it was free for me to change my name. It was $120 for him to change his name. We live in a gendered society. It is still largely patriarchal. What it's like to be LGBTQ is that you are always searching for freedom. You are always searching for an open, safe space where you stop having to edit every damn thing you say, every gesture you have. You stop having to struggle. That is why a faith community like this is so important, because many, many LGBTQ people have been marginalized from their Christian faith.
Can I add to that?
Yeah, please do.
Something as simple as, I park illegally at work. I do it, guys. We are supposed to park at the hospital, employees above the second floor in the ramp. I am afraid at 7:30 when I come out of the hospital to go into the ramp, because I am out of work. And it's never been a secret, but I don't know, who knows? And it's the new person on the janitorial crew, and I am now on the ramp, and I'd love to say our security guys have their eyeballs on that ramp at all times, but let's be realistic. They're talking to the person that's coming in and just asked them for somebody's room.
Right.
This and that. So for me, I mean, I'm very out and everything, but it's the fear of my safety prior and after work, especially in the winter when it's dark when I go to work, it's dark when I come out of work. And my car, you don't know, I drive a bright yellow Prius. Is very identifiable, and they can be waiting anywhere. And I have a friend in Boston who's been assaulted in the ramp of her hospital 4 times in her career. And so I'm the one that parks illegally at work. But you know, they've never stopped me. And I would, of course, tell them, this is why.
Right. Right.
Even though we have a very positive work environment, it's when before you clock in and after you clock out are the 2 times that I work.
And it doesn't have to be somebody you work with. It could be somebody they spoke to. It could be at Costco. You're there at closing time with your wife. You've held hands. Now you're in danger walking out in the parking lot. The statistic of 9 times more likely to be the victim of violence is real. And that is why I would say one of the primary reasons, that and financial marginalization, are the reasons people don't come out. So imagine your identity. Imagine maybe I'd say one of the top 2-3 things of your whole identity, and you squeeze it in. You never talk about it. Something that is unbelievably important to you, intrinsic to who you are, but you can't talk to anybody about it.
One of the things at work, it sounds good or bad, I don't know. Since I'm out and in college, my boyfriend was physically female, was trans. When they get a trans person, my friends that know me, they see struggling, they will say,
Yeah.
I see a lot is missing. And
Right.
of course, we have some medical staff that are set in their ways and their views. And so I always try to get somebody that's a little more fluid.
Absolutely. This kind of goes back to the question this lovely lady in green was talking about. Just because you have the policy, doesn't change anybody's heart and mind. I do a lot of training. I've done maybe too much training this month, I'm going to be honest. But I talk to people a lot. And I'm going to go back and say it is an individual story, a friendship, an experience that changes people's mind. A policy isn't going to do it. I can talk to a brick wall all day long, but it doesn't make it any less of a brick wall. So that is something to consider too within your faith community here. Can you help people with resources? Yes, Tony.
Something to add for your question. I'm a straight white guy. If I walk in a room, people do not question anything about me. They accept what I am. Out of curiosity, how often have you two been asked whether or not the fact that you're lesbians has to do with you just haven't met the right guy yet?
So the question is, how many times have lesbians been asked, haven't you met the right guy yet?
That is amazing. In my experience, most of our gay LGBT friends, people seem more entitled to second guessing them and saying, I don't think you've met the right person. You're just going through a phase. You don't really know. The people who would normally not say a word to someone like me and say, you probably would look better in a dress. You might be more comfortable with yourself if you had fingernail polish on. Will approach someone and be like, oh, you should present yourself differently than you are. You should be someone who you're not, and I know better as a stranger confronting you with zero knowledge of your background. People feel much more entitled to microaggressions like that when someone is presenting themselves as anything other than straight, cisgendered, run-of-the-mill, default box standard.
You kind of bring up an excellent point. Like, if you're different in this world, you are implied vulnerable. And when you're vulnerable, it's okay to say whatever you want to somebody in the guise of helping them. We live in a heteronormative world. The assumption is that your spouse is a different sex. The assumption is that the way you look is who you are. If we lived in a homonormative world, I would say, oh, are you with him? Maybe you just haven't met the right girl yet.
That brings up, it doesn't seem all that important, but if you ask my cousin and her wife how long they've been married, they will give you 3 different dates. They'll give you the one where they did their own ceremony. They'll give you one where they did a civil union, and they'll give you their wedding they had when they finally legally married in Minnesota. So don't act surprised that you have 3.
Yeah.
I mean, it's common.
Yeah.
It's common and they'll celebrate 1, 2, or all of those in any given year. But it's common.
Yeah, I mean, so when we think of our church here, right? What are some things we can do knowing these experiences? What are some things we can do to make it feel good for LGBTQ people to be here? Give me some ideas.
Welcome them when they come in. Don't ask doesn't matter what their orientation is.
Right.
They're welcome. They're a human being. We're happy to see them. Would you like to sit with somebody? Come sit with me if you want to. Being that inclusive. I know when I came here for the first time, I was hugged. I was told how great I looked. Man, I felt awesome. And they said, are you with anybody? I'm like, her. But that is the one thing I really remember was Judy was the first one that came up to me, and she said, I love your jacket. Welcome to SouthPointe. And she gave me this huge hug. And that was my first image of SouthPointe, was Judy giving me this huge hug and telling me how great I looked. And it made me
Absolutely. What does your sign say? It says welcome all. It says welcome all. I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm guessing you're pretty excited when new people walk in the door, right? Nobody wants to have a conversation with the same old people every single week. It's exciting when new people come in because you feel like you have something important to share. You feel like your community is important and beautiful and glorious and you want to share it, right? So do it. This church is as strong as the community within it. The walls mean nothing without the heart and mind of the people who are here. So say hi. Find a sincere compliment. Give people a hug. That's pretty simple, right? What else could we do? Abby? I'll call on you. Make no mistake.
I mean, that's part for me, asking the questions that are not so heteronormative and assuming, I think for everybody, assuming certain things about lives, asking the, what do you do with your free time? What gives you joy?
Yeah.
Not the like, hey, what's your job? Are you married? Do you have kids? Because those things are really not great conversations for a lot of people.
And honestly, if people are excited about being married and having kids, they'll tell you, won't they? Like, you'll get a pictures, and you'll be like, wow, that is also a good picture of him. I mean, people to give you pictures of their kids or their pets, be excited about both. But people will tell you who they are if you ask them the questions that may mean something to them, right? For some people, the best way to connect is about sports. For some people, the best way to connect is your kids. Just have an arsenal of great questions would be good. Who doesn't like to talk about themselves? Who doesn't like to feel appreciated? Tony doesn't like to talk about himself, but that's another story. People like to feel appreciated. They want to feel like you really care and want to know. What else can we do? Yes?
Why ask the question? Not to hit the nail too hard on the head, but like being very open and saying we are a safe place of refuge.
Yeah.
This is a safe place, and we got to do things along with it. But I think it matters because if you don't know where a safe place is, are you going to go there? If you don't know a place is safe, do you go? If you don't know it's a place that you're loved, it's a place that you're cared about, do you go? I mean, I wouldn't have that problem, but like, I'm going to think twice about going somewhere that I don't feel safe.
At this point, I don't even go to places that have small chairs with small arms. I just don't. It could be as simple as having a rainbow out front and nothing else. But what's the word for when the way you feel is also the way you act? It's integrity. Have spiritual and emotional integrity in your church. If you truly believe that you want people here, welcome them. Treat them like they're important, because every human being is important. Every human being has a special kind of genius. Every human being has a heart that needs to be shared. Yes, that sounds super kumbaya, but I truly lead with that in every part of my life. And you can too. From a pragmatic perspective, I would also say having resources at hand, because somebody, when somebody starts to trust you, they tell you about the challenges in their life. Wouldn't it be great if you could say, wait, we have a list of affirming doctors, or wait, I know a lawyer who can do a power of attorney for you for free. I know somebody at Out Nebraska who could come to your workplace and talk. I know where a therapist is that can help your kiddo. Because knowledge is power, and it's great. We feel good when we can solve people's problems, right? We feel so good. But it's also important to them, because they'll see, you thought about this before I did, and you already had it ready for me. Even though you didn't know me, you were already ready to love me. What's more powerful than that? I think we're getting to a pretty late time.
Yeah, I promised people about an hour and a half extra church, so we're kind of hitting that. So
Okay.
I wanted to make sure you have anything and anybody else gets to ask questions, but we're hitting that.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for coming.
It's a real privilege to be with you today.
Thank you.
Oh,
I'm only using this so the people watching can still hear me because I know we have a few who are planning to turn in. We haven't, as part of this open and affirming conversation, worried about those clobber verses, what does the Bible say, those sorts of things. Those are conversations. I grew up fundamentalist, like I can have them in my sleep. But if those matter to you, let's have them. That's also an invitation. We're not just skipping over that part. One of the resources that I love is actually a book called A Lily Among the Thorns. It's by a guy named Miguel de la Torre, who's one of my favorite authors across the board. And what he hits on is so many things that are written from a Christian perspective are about deconstructing our ideas of gender and sexuality. And he actually does some really good constructive work. And so I think for those of us, we care about the health and well-being of everyone. It's not just about we don't care about these verses or here's how we're going to interpret them. It's about what do we care about? What do we care about when we talk about gender and sexuality and these things? I'm happy to loan that. I'm happy to talk however. But I think there's some really compelling positive things as well. And again, if we want to do more Bible theology stuff, we can as well. But I want to say thank you to Sarah again for being here. Thank you for Tony for hanging in there. Matt probably feels your investment very, very readily. So thank you again, and I will see you all probably all this week some more. So.